Welcome into episode 191. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at ViceCA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Christian, how are we doing?
I have a stomach ache.
Not ideal.
No,
We're all
that's
going through it.
yeah.
I
So
I have a story.
if you guys want to send some thoughts and prayers to my Twitter account since I'm doing the podcast while having a stomach ache, I'd really appreciate it and would help me through
That's what we
this.
do. That's what we do for you people. You people.
You made me feel worse because I don't usually get tummy aches, and I just realized I shouldn't have called it a tummy ache on the podcast because I was jokingly calling it that to you, and that sounds so stupid when I say it out loud because I was saying in text. But anyway, I have a tummy ache, and I don't usually get them, and we're like 10 minutes late to start because I was like, I just need to like lie down for a minute and hope that it's like my stomach's all cramped up. It's annoying. And you instantly, I'm like, yeah, these suck. I don't know how to deal with them. And you're like, I get them all the time and just like power through. And I'm like, oh,
No,
okay.
I
So
didn't say that.
I
I
just
said I
suck
said
at
I
it.
get
Good to
them all the
know.
time and also don't know how to deal with them still. That was not what I said. You heard
Oh,
a
okay.
completely you heard what I didn't say. You finished my sentence in your head and didn't listen to the end of my
That was how
sentence.
I took it because I was all like, oh, this is so hard. And you were like, yeah, it's hard dealing with what I deal with all the time, but
No,
it's
it
fine.
was just yeah, whatever. I have a weird story to tell. This is just how
Okay.
the podcast has like infiltrated my brain. Do you remember a couple weeks ago we were ranking travel destinations and I was just not saying nice things about West Virginia
I
and how I
do.
just apparently I hate West Virginia. I didn't really realize that
We
until that
discovered in real
podcast.
time that you hate West Virginia.
I got I got a phone call today. It popped up on my phone. It was from somewhere in West Virginia, and my mind immediately went to I'm getting an angry call from West Virginia. And I don't know what it was. I'm sure it was just a spam call, but that was like my podcast immediately entered my brain. And I was like, I wonder if they heard the things I said about them.
You should have
I knew
answered
that
the
wasn't the
phone.
case, but
You should have answered the phone and they would have been like, hello, we're here in West Virginia. And you could have just said, did you know you suck? And then just hung up the phone.
so I hate West Virginia.
I wonder what they were
Their
calling you about.
stupid song.
They were probably trying to sell you tickets for the UCF West Virginia game.
No, I don't. It wasn't Morgantown. It was Brandywine, which I didn't know was.
Brandywine.
That's two different. That's
Is
two
there a
types of
single city in West Virginia
alcohol,
that has
isn't
a
there?
real name?
I don't mean I can't name that many more. So
Well,
I didn't know
this
Brandywine
is gonna
existed
blow
until
your
today.
mind, but is brandy not just aged wine? Isn't that what brandy is?
Is that what it is? I don't know. But I really have no idea.
Hold on.
we,
Looking it up.
we have to look it up before we can continue.
Yeah, brandy is a
Um,
liquor produced by distilling wine. So there you go. So
oh,
the name of
I
that
didn't know
town is
that.
really before and after, or after and before.
Shout out West Virginia. Shout out
Worst
Brandywine,
worst
West
intro
Virginia.
to a podcast ever, some are saying. It's
I don't
this
think
one.
so.
We've covered me having a stomach ache and how West Virginia town names
A
suck. But
tummy ache.
anyway,
It
a
wasn't
tummy
the
ache.
intro, but I don't think anyone's going to be calling this the worst after listening to the survey podcast
That is true.
a couple
More
weeks
than a
ago.
few people said that that one wasn't as bad as we felt like it was when we were recording it.
Don't
I wouldn't
agree.
know because I spot check and listen to the podcast every single week, and that one I could not bring myself to do it. So I have not listened back to that episode.
I don't remember who it was, but someone like tweeted at us and was like, I don't know if I'm just a sicko, but I was like enjoying it. And I was like, you are a sicko because we were talking about it and I wasn't enjoying it. So
I've heard
yeah,
from, I think we're up to like 5 or 6 total people who have said it wasn't that bad. So to those of you who said that, we appreciate it. Just know that I believe that no one else agrees with you. It was
those
actually
5 to 6
terrible.
people, I think we reached the limit where those 5 to 6 people will listen to anything we talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Like me
And they'll
having a
be like, oh, it
stomach
was
ache.
great.
It was awesome, man.
Yeah, but what we're going to talk about today, our big topic for the day, is all the coaching staff changes, which we like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times in last week's scheduled podcast started like veering into the conversation. We're like, oh, we'll save it for next week. We'll save it for next week. But it's next week. And I don't know, we've had more time. And it's funny because I feel like last week when I wanted to talk about this stuff, I was just going to unload. And now that I was preparing for the actual podcast to talk about it, I was like, I don't know. I was like, I might have mellowed out a little bit, but we'll get through them all. We'll
I mean,
talk.
my thoughts are out there already. You can go to Night Sports
Yeah,
Now right now and read. I don't really feel differently about anything than I did there, but it's just funny how actually it says a lot about how much college football has changed that the day that we finally there's nothing going on so we can just talk about this is National Signing Day. That's how much college football has
yeah.
changed in the last few years because there is nothing going. UCF signed a couple preferred walk-ons and that was it. So we are free to go
I
on the coaching changes.
yeah, and then all the transfers enrolled and all that, and so we got the
Yeah.
graphics for all that. I didn't know why that. Like, I was like, why are they all coming out today? Like, I did not know it was National Signing Day. Like,
Which, to be
it's
clear,
become
there's nothing. These guys are all already enrolled and have been on campus. Like, there's
yeah.
nothing happened today. It was just it's National Signing Day, and UCF does not have any new high school signees. They all signed in December, so good time to promote the transfer class.
Yeah, I did not understand. I was like, what? I was like, why are all these coming now? And that's really how much it's changed to where the December signing day is just everything now.
Which,
So I mean,
interestingly, there's a lot of talk. I was reading an athletic thing about it that the December signing day is not long for the world. Next year, there's a good shot will be the last year they have it because they're asking college football programs in the month of December to do transfer portal opening and signing those guys, high school sign what has become National Signing Day and signing your high school class,
yeah,
and also preparing, practicing, and coaching in a bowl game. And that's a lot of things to do in a and possibly changing jobs since everyone's firing their assistants then.
yeah,
So a lot of things happening in a very short span. So some of the ideas were interesting because there are a few different ones they're looking at. They're looking at just keeping the February signing day and that's it. They're also talking about moving early signing day to July. And then if you're just ready over the summer, you can just sign then and then just enjoy your senior year and not have to worry about it. And that also might cut down on schools sending out non-committable offers and kind of stringing kids along who they're not actually going to take because they have to sign them in July. So there's some interesting options out there.
that is interesting, and it shows how little I pay attention to any of that stuff because I didn't know any of these conversations were happening. So
But
I'm
we've
glad that's.
established I'm the weird one here. I spend all day every day reading about all the intricacies of college football, and there's a lot of it because the sport keeps blowing up every 4 days. So
I think
a lot going
I've
on.
realized that I compartmentalize it where it's like there will be days where I'm like I'll think about college football. Like in the off season, there's fewer of those days, but like now I'm getting so excited for softball to start and for baseball to
Yeah.
start that it's just like, all right, like I'm not really concerned. Well, I'm not. It's not true. I'm not concerned. Like I say, I'm not concerned with it, but all of the off season football stuff kind of takes a back seat for me. I'm like, all right, when spring ball comes around, we'll get dialed back into that. But
I
no, I mean
feel
all these
like the
coaching
way I get
changes. Go ahead,
about
yeah.
no, I'm going to keep derailing this. Don't worry. I
Okay.
feel like I need to do less of it too because, and I send some of it to you. It's really disheartening to read about most of what's happening in college football because nationally things just aren't going well. The SEC and the Big Ten have formed this advisory committee where they've cut out the ACC and Big 12. It's most of it is bad, and I get really down about it when I read it. So I don't know why I continue to read every little shred of information, especially since I, as an individual, am helpless to do anything about it. But hey, we do it anyway.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because and I've noticed it too. It's like some of the stuff I'll just see on Twitter and I'll be like, okay, I'll just scroll past it or I'll see it on the Athletic or whatever. And then there's other stuff that I just won't see at all until like you're like, oh, I was listening to this podcast where they brought this up, and I was like, see, yeah, I would have never known about this unless I was friends with you, which is a good thing, I think.
I think so.
Um, yeah, I think
For
so
you,
because it
because
keeps
I
me.
basically it's great for you because what I do is get the full force of how terrible everything is, and then I text you the cliff notes
And
because I'm just
then
that
yeah,
interested in it.
and then even the stuff that you text me, sometimes I don't care about. It's like I'll filter out what I do, like I need to care about, what I don't need to care about. So
I will text you a long text about some college football like high level administration thing, like how the NCAA is dealing with its Tennessee Attorney General court case or whatever. You will read it and not reply, and then I will send you another long paragraph of more thoughts I have on it immediately after. And I think we're both just fine with that. Like that's
I
just
think,
how
I
it
mean,
goes.
I'm glad to know that you're not offended by it because like a lot of times it's during the workday and it's just like I don't have
I
time to
don't
like
care at
have a
all.
full conversation
No.
about it, but like I do like I sometimes will like want to acknowledge it. I'm like, oh, I'm just like, oh, interesting, because like stuff is interesting, but it's
I
like
also send you
I
stuff
can't.
that I don't really expect. Like, I'm not really trying to have a conversation with you. I'm just seeing a thing and I'm like, this is interesting. So I want Bailey to see it too. And I send it your way. I'm kind of like your college football newsletter. I just shoot you whatever the big
Kind
things
of.
are happening each day.
Yeah, kind of. That's the case. But all right, let's get into it. Let's get into all these coaching staff
All
changes
right.
where UCF does and doesn't have an entirely new coaching staff under Gus Malzahn. Like, there's a lot of the same guys are still there, but a lot of them are also in different roles. And we're kind of just going to go through to keep this as organized as we can to go through some of these changes and talk about them in, I guess, in a vacuum, and then go general with it and just kind of talk about what Gus Malzahn and UCF are setting up this season to hopefully be and the dangers of that maybe. But let's start with the defensive side of the ball. Ted Roof was hired as defensive coordinator. I guess, a lot of these things happened 3 weeks
Yeah.
to a
We've
month ago.
talked about these things in pieces.
We talked about Roof, but the wider conversation of it we haven't really gotten into. So yeah, he was hired as a defensive coordinator, and Addison Williams got demoted. And along the way, linebackers coach Ernie Sims is gone after 1 year.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to start? Because
Sure.
yeah, go ahead.
So I'm glad that we're starting with the coaching change that I feel the absolute worst about, and that was bringing in Roof as DC. We talked about this a little bit, and this was where I wish that when I'd published the article and a lot of you got very mad at me, I would have appreciated if more of you had read it instead of just getting mad at a headline because
Yeah,
the bottom line with these coaching changes, and it's why I'm a little disappointed in the fan base and some other folks, is that I think that we need to be able to deal with changes that happen with UCF and really anything UCF related with a little bit more nuance. I think that it's okay to say that some things are clear home runs and some things aren't. I think that I don't know what's going on, but it just feels like the pendulum's always completely in one direction or the other. It's either every single decision that Gus Malzahn makes is bad and automatically against everything, or every single thing is good. And that was kind of where I was getting frustrated because it just feels like you're either all in on these changes or you're not. When the real answer is there are some changes they have made that I believe needed to be made and were clearly very good. There were clear home runs that they have addressed this offseason. There are other ones where it's okay to say this is a head scratcher. And it's surprising to think that this is the best they could do. And I think hiring Ted Roof as DC very much falls in the category of I'm very surprised this is the best they can do. You all know that we were of the stance that we didn't think they needed to make a change at DC, period. I thought that they could roll with Addison. I thought that while we knew there were issues there, I felt I didn't feel he was a first-time DC, and also they just didn't have the personnel. If you decide that he's not the guy for now, and you need to bring in someone with more experience, I think that's fine, and I can understand that logic and be on board with it. I don't get how you land on Ted Roof. That's the part that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you phrased it that way, where you're saying like approaching things with like a nuanced view, because that's what I feel like I fall into. And it's a weird spot to be in where like you take a nuanced stance on something and you feel like you're in the minority for doing that.
Yeah.
Like I think there were problems, of course, with the defense last year, that some of it was Addison, some of it was just not having the guys and not having the depth and making the jump up to a new conference. And so I'm honestly like, I'm fine with, and I'm glad they kept him because of the recruiting and because I think there is still value. Like I'm glad they didn't completely cut him loose. And I think doing so would have been extremely harsh, but so I'm fine with that move. It's just the fact that he's demoted, and then we've talked about it when this news first came out about Roof, and I kind of just dove further into him, and I just outside of all the other stuff, how is he not tired?
He's been
like
to a lot
not
of
retired,
places,
but like how is he not tired? I was like looking, and it's always like a year. Like
yeah.
It's just like he has bounced around. This is the 14th school that he has served as a defensive coordinator for.
As a defensive coordinator?
I believe, yeah, I counted, and some of them was like one of or two of them was co-DC.
So he has held a defensive
okay.
coordinator title, not even all coaching, just defense coordinator title at UMass, Western Carolina, Georgia Tech, Duke, Minnesota, Auburn, UCF for like a month.
That's the thing, is
back
I
in
counted
2011.
UCF and he never even coached a game, but still I counted UCF.
Penn State, Georgia Tech, NC State, App State, Vanderbilt, where he was there with Ethan Barr, now UCF linebacker.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, and now UCF. Now, some might call that experience. I might say that maybe if he was better, he would have stuck at one of those places for a little longer than bouncing around. Also, just to be totally clear, he didn't leave Oklahoma. Oklahoma fired him at the end of this season. And it wasn't funny. It wasn't one of those things where it was like, whatever. I mean, Oklahoma fans were pretty unanimously thrilled that they'd gotten rid of him and were not happy with him at all.
It's funny because like I was just kind of wanting to get some background on him and went to Wikipedia, as one does.
Of course.
And his departure from Oklahoma was phrased as them mutually agreeing to part ways, and I don't think that's what happened.
That is not what happened. That's not spitballing. That was reported by the Oklahoma sites, by AP, by everyone. He was fired by Oklahoma.
And as I read through some of this stuff, like at each of these stops, like he's done good work. Like he's had a lot of them, I think. Like and it where the rankings and whatever. Like I saw some stuff where I was like, okay, but it's just a weird, like, I don't know. And this was something we talked about when it first broke, was like, how did they phrase this job when they went? Like, and did they conduct like an actual search for this job?
Because that's what I don't think happened, because I don't think they would have landed on Roof if they did. Gus, he and Ted Roof coached together at Auburn in 2011, the year that I believe that was the year they won the national title of Cam Newton. And
2010 was,
2010. Yeah, you're right. I'm wrong. Were they together? Yeah, well, either way, they coached together at Auburn. And Gus, when he's talked about this publicly, it was 2009 to 2011. They were together at Auburn. The only real things he has to say is he has a lot of experience, and I coached with him at Auburn. And Gus Malzahn is trying to do this thing this offseason, which I'm okay with, where they're trying to be very cutthroat. They're not, staying where they are. They're not saying, well, we're on a path, so we'll stay on this path. They're doing whatever needs to be done to improve. And that's a risk because it raises expectations and also just brings all kinds of issues. But my thing is, if you're going to be cutthroat, then be freaking cutthroat. You want to replace Addison, which is a controversial and kind of a risky move, then go get the best freaking DC out there you can. And don't go get someone just because I know them and I'm comfortable with them, I worked them before. You can't tell me with a straight face that Ted Roof was the best option available is someone who would be interested in a power forward defensive coordinator job where they're going to be running the defense. And since Gus is an offensive coach, probably gonna be pretty hands off. Whoever the DC is will pretty much have control of that unit. And I just don't buy that Ted Roof is genuinely the best option they can do. I think he was the most familiar option, and I don't think that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah. This doesn't really have anything to do with it. As I was doing research, he was laughably bad as a head coach.
Yeah,
Like,
he was Duke's head coach, and it did not go well.
He
Long
went
time ago.
6-45. It's not
He
good.
went as a so he was an interim 1 year, and then after taking over as head coach, he went 2-9, 1-10, 0-12, and 1-11 was then fired. I will caveat this that was a very long time ago. It was 2003 to 2007, and also Duke is historically an awful job. So I'm not saying that he shouldn't be the DC because he was bad at Duke years ago. I'm saying he shouldn't be the DC because I think that there were better options, and I'm frustrated that they went for a Gus retread.
Yeah,
Especially because Ted Roof coaches linebackers. And, defensive coordinators of any kind typically also coach a positions group. So bring in Ted Roof meant the departure of Ernie Sims after 1 year. Ernie Sims, I think, could have been a very good positions coach. I think he had a lot of recruiting juice. I think he got scapegoated a little bit by some of the fan base because of how bad the linebackers were. And I'm frustrated that that's the way things are going to be remembered because I don't think he holds much of any blame for how bad the linebackers were. I think, unfortunately, Travis Williams takes a lot of that blame.
You know what I wrote in my notes for this podcast about Ernie Sims?
What?
I put Ernie Sims - what did he do to deserve this?
Fair. Valid.
I know the linebackers weren't good, but he was here for 1 year. He didn't recruit any of those guys. No. And yeah, you're the positions coach, but like there is only so much you do as a positions coach. Like if a guy's not that great, he's not that great. And also you're also following the scheme that's put in place by the defensive coordinator. So if there's issues with the first-time defensive coordinator, that could trickle down and have nothing to do with Ernie Sims. I thought he was a guy that players liked. I thought recruits, like he was with recruits. I saw like future recruits or other guys tweeting when he was let go, like what the hell, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That move didn't sit right with me. And I know they had to do it because of coaching numbers and all that stuff, but it's one of those like consequences of a decision that I was already not a huge fan of. So
if you are like, say you're like, we'll see if this analogy works. Say you're like a really good carpenter, right? And you're the best carpenter in the world. And I tell you to build me like a nice cabinet or like a nice dresser.
Okay.
And to do this, I hand you wood that is rotted and cheap. And I give you a hammer that is rusty. And I give you a saw that is dull. You're probably not going to build me a very good cabinet, even if you're the best carpenter in the world. And I feel like fans are confusing a little bit the impact and the influence a positions coach can have over what they're given to work with. And when you look at the linebacker room under Travis Williams, they lost Tatum Bethune to the portal. He could have still been at UCF in 2023. They lost Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste to the portal. He could have still been here for 2023. Travis Williams, who was a very good DC, this was his one real screw up. To replace them, brought in a 5-star with serious off-field issues in Terrence Lewis, who didn't even make it a few months with the program, and a former blue chipper in Brandon Jennings, who also never even really did anything for UCF. So when you lose all your best linebackers and bring in some very risky portal acquisitions that don't work out, there's really only so much for the next guy to work with in year one. I don't know what else he was supposed to do differently.
Yeah. I think that analogy worked. I really, that's why I was laughing. So I was like, oh, that was a pretty good analogy. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like, and this, I don't know if this even is worth saying as a caveat, because I think it's pretty obvious. It can go without saying that, like, we don't know the behind the scenes. Well, it's like, we haven't been coached by anything. Like, we don't know. It's just our opinion, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's not, this, like, we have inside information about like this coach wasn't liked by this person, or like this coach was beloved. And I don't know. It's just kind of like the vibes that we're getting off of the coaching staff. And when there's such an upheaval of a coaching staff like this, we'll get to it. We'll get to the whole wider meaning of it and what it does, but it says a lot of things about Gus Malzahn, the way he viewed last year, his expectations, and where we are and where UCF may or may not be going. So
it's rare for a team to have the type of season that UCF had and make changes to this degree. You don't see a ton of that. Florida blew up their coaching staff this offseason, but that's because Billy Napier's almost out of a job here. I mean, it's typically coaches who are close to the hot seat or a program that is doing dramatically worse than expected that make changes to this degree. Like I said, you can spin that as okay. You can spin that as they're not resting on laurels. They're not just saying, well, we're on a nice trajectory. They're saying, screw this. Let's get as good as we can right away. And I think that's fine. I don't think that's bad. It's just some of these moves, I don't know if they were the best way to do that, and only time will tell.
Yeah. Let's get over to the offense, I guess. Let's do that next. So the way this news came out was weird,
Yes,
but
very weird.
it first came out that Tim Harris was leaving Miami to become the offensive coordinator at UCF. And there was no like, I don't know, Hinshaw was up in the helicopter that day recruiting with
Yep.
Gus.
And this broke
And
from Miami's side because he was Miami's running
yeah,
backs coach and co-OC. So Miami media broke this, so we just had no idea what was going on because as far as we
yeah.
were aware, UCF had an offensive coordinator at the time of that news breaking.
Let me clarify one thing before we go any further. Is Herb Hand, does he have a co-OC title?
The new system is Tim Harris is the offensive coordinator. Darren Hinshaw and Herb Hand are below him as co-offensive coordinators. They both have co-OC titles, and they're under
Here's
the
the
OC.
thing. There's an offensive coordinator. There's two co-offensive coordinators.
Yes.
That's three guys.
No,
None
it's an
of them
offensive
call
coordinator,
plays.
and none of them.
None of them call plays because Gus Malzahn is taking play calling back.
So we'll get into that separately because I have more to say on the Gus Malzahn play
Yeah.
calling, but I think that's a different discussion than bringing Tim Harrison. But
It is.
yeah.
No, it is. But I put on here, I said having an OC and two co-OCs is already dumb. But none of them calling plays is crazy.
It's not, I'll push back. It's not necessarily dumb because the titles are
thing,
just
but...
for raises and standing and all that. It like Herb Hand's role is not for also by the way, Herb Hand does have a pretty substantial role with the team and is kind of like a right-hand man to Gus. So I'm okay with him. Like I'm not like, why he shouldn't have that title because it's too many guys. It is a little silly that there are how many staff members total are a coordinator for UCF this year? 5?
I think
Addison
so.
Williams, Ted Roof, Tim Harris, Darren Hinshaw, and Herb Hand are all coordinators for UCF this year. It's a little silly.
It's just funny. No, yeah, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. It's like I'm not, and I don't know if it has anything to do. Like if it's raises, like you have to have a certain title to be able to get this money. Like sure, like I get why they're doing that, and maybe it's to give them this title so they don't go somewhere else for that title and more money, whatever it is. But it's just when you look at the structure of a coaching staff and see a coordinator, two co-offensive coordinators, it just looks dumb.
Well, there are a lot of jobs in the world, right, where it's like, I'm an accountant 1, and then I get a promotion after a couple years, right? It's congrats. You've been promoted to accountant 2, and now you make more money. Does that mean it? Like, it doesn't really mean anything. Right. It's just you're in higher standing than you were before. So I think it's kind of along those lines.
But going back to Tim Harris, I'm glad. Like I like that they brought him back. I don't think they were upset to lose him. I think to begin with,
they were very upset to lose him.
Great for recruiting. So that's the thing. Is like, and I don't want to. This whole coaching conversation we're having, I don't want to like paint the picture that I'm upset with everything. Like that's good. And there's even like I said with the defensive coordinator thing. Like glad that they kept Addison Williams for the recruiting and to hopefully get him back to a position where he learns a little bit more on the job and can become a defensive coordinator.
You hope eventually he might retake that role for UCF,
right.
Or maybe even potentially be a head coach for UCF when Gus decides to retire. I think that's a genuine trajectory they still think is possible.
And that's the thing for the offense is like and that's why I went into this saying like a lot of it is nuanced takes where it's like I feel like it sounds like I'm all over the board, but I'm really not. It's just looking at it kind of case by case,
right?
And it leads to like kind of a confusing outlook on the whole thing, but. Bringing Tim Harris back is awesome.
Huge win.
Like I think that's great for recruiting. I mean, it's funny. People were talking about the trickle down effect it had today because Miami replaced him with I think USF's running backs coach or something like that, and like run game coordinator. So it was just a funny how that resulted in that. But no, I mean, I think that alone, bringing him back is awesome, and I'm glad they were able to do that. And
I'm impressed they were able to do it because he was UCF's running backs coach. Very, very important to UCF from a recruiting perspective. He's also just a freaking good positions coach. Yeah. And he left to become Miami's running backs coach, which is totally understandable. He's all about South Florida. That's where he's from. And like, let's be totally clear. I know some UCF fans, for whatever reason, don't want to hear this, but positions coach at UCF, positions coach at Miami. Miami's going to pay more and be more prestigious, all of that. But they're bringing him back. So he went to Miami to become the running backs coach / co-OC. He got the title kind of like how Herb Hand has the title. And for UCF to bring him back, he's being promoted to offensive coordinator. But as we just said, Gus Malzahn is the offensive coordinator. So for them to convince him to come back to really not run an offense is impressive. Whatever money it took and whatever conversations it took is a big deal because he is a major key to South Florida recruiting. He was for Miami and he will be for UCF. And they're going to have access to guys that they probably weren't going to have access to without him. That is a big win to get him back.
Yeah, I think so. Is he also Did he come back as the wide receivers coach too?
That's the part I have a little bit of concern about. Is he is
He's not
replacing
the running
Grant
back coach
Hurd
anymore.
as the wide receivers coach. Yeah. So and I looked up. He has coached wide receivers in the past. I believe he coached them at the high school level, and it was a while ago at this point. So
Mm-hmm.
I I don't know. It's one of those things where you talk to different people who both have worked in college athletics or cover college athletics, and you're going to get different opinions on what it really means to be a positions coach. Some people think that recruiting is the most important part of that, and the rest of it is kind of secondary. If you have good players, you'll be a good positions coach. Some people think that you can really be damaged by not having a coach who understands your position. And I'm not saying that Tim Harris doesn't understand wide receivers. I'm sure he does. Like I said, he's coached them before, but it does feel a little like we have the opportunity to get this really great recruiter on staff. Where can we plug him in? We have an opening wide receiver, go for it. And I worry about that a little bit, but I also feel like just because of his recruiting prowess, that's probably worth
Yeah,
the risk.
I think so. 100%. I don't know that I have any problem with it whatsoever, really. It's just I think the funny thing and the weird thing about it is the OC versus the co-OCs versus none of them calling plays. But
Yeah.
the
It's
other
also a
thing,
little funny that for Tim Harris, right? Like he's going to be like passing RJ Harvey in the hallway and who he coached for a couple of years. And it's like, yeah, I don't coach you
yeah.
anymore. But nice to see you.
And the other thing, I guess, that was weird about this, and I mean, there's no way of knowing how he would feel about it. I don't think he'd ever really say it, but what is like for Darren Hinshaw, it's like that's a demotion.
It's a clear demotion.
Yeah,
He
like he
had
was
control of
the
the
offensive
offense and was
coordinator.
running it. Now we all know it was Gus's offense, but he was calling plays and running the offense, and he is now the quarterback's coach. Let's be clear, whatever title he's
Yeah,
given, he's the quarterback's coach. And he's a damn good quarterback's coach. I don't think we've
yeah.
talked enough about, and we hoped that he would do it. It was why he was hired, but he really did a very good job on John Rice Plumlee and took him from a wide receiver who we were putting at the wrong position to actually playing like a quarterback. And credit to JRP too, but I really think a lot of that goes to Hinshaw, especially since he's had a track record of doing that at previous stops, especially at
Yeah.
Kentucky. He did it with a couple guys. So he is a good guy to have as quarterback's coach, no doubt about it. But yeah, he comes back to his alma mater to run the offense, and it's taken away from him midway through his first season under dubious circumstances, in my opinion, which we'll get into with the next section. And that sucks. It sucks for him. It is
Well,
unfortunate.
it's not only getting the control taken away from you, it's also you going from even not calling plays, you're still the offensive coordinator now to you're a co-offensive coordinator, and it's
Yeah.
really there you're in title only. You're the quarterback's coach. Like it's just I don't know. It's
Check
and
cash is the
I
same
don't
though,
think
right?
yeah no it does, and I don't think, and we can get into the play calling thing now. I think like I don't think there was anything with. Or do we not want to get into this yet? Do we want to go back to? I think I skipped one. I did skip one, but we'll go
Let's
back
do
to
yeah, we can do play calling. We can do play
let's
calling
do play
because we're
calling
kind
now
of on
because
that topic.
there wasn't anything that I thought Darren Hinshaw did poorly enough for Gus to take play calling back and keep play calling for 2024 and then be demoted the way he was. And I'm curious about the whole like now he's co-OC and quarterbacks coach. Was it just because like that's the only way they could get Tim Harris to come back was giving him the offensive coordinator role? Like
That's
I
kind of
don't
what
know
I
if that
wonder,
was
because
just the
what does that really
circumstances.
mean for Tim Harris? Gus is going to be designing and running and calling the
Yeah.
offense. I don't really know what Tim Harris's OC role is, but I don't
Yeah.
know. But so Brandon Helwig reported, we now know the exact game that Gus Malzahn took play calling away from Darren Hinshaw and took over the offense after the West Virginia game. So there are a couple ways to look at this. The positive way is that Gus took over and the 5-game losing streak ended. They beat Cincinnati, then they went and beat Oklahoma State. They lost by Texas Tech to 1, then they beat Houston. They were clearly better after Gus Malzahn took over play calling. The not as good way to look at it is they weren't better because of the offense. They were better because the defense got better and because they were playing worse teams. Cincinnati and Houston were always going to be the easier wins on the schedule. So
Yeah.
I did look it up. So they went 3-2 after Gus took over, which isn't bad. So looking at just how many points the offense scored, we're just looking at Power 5 teams because I don't want like Hinshaw's stats inflated by it because he was calling plays for Villanova and Kent State. So Hinshaw and Malzahn each had control of the offense for 5 Power 5 games. Hinshaw, they averaged 29 points per game. Malzahn, they averaged 28 points per game. I should also point out that Hinshaw did not have John Rice Plumlee for 3 of those 5 games. He had Timmy McClain. So really, as far as offensive production, no notable difference at all between the play callers. So I don't really know what Gus saw from what changed to say I was right to do this. But again, I don't want to discredit. They started winning games after Gus took over. I'm just not so sure it's because he took over. It feels a little coincidental.
Like he just wanted the control back. That's the whole thing where I learned like things weren't significantly better, and it was always Hinshaw calling Gus's offense. So like it
Yes.
wasn't like anything really changed. It was just Hinshaw calling the plays from Gus's playbook, and I just don't know what suddenly changed because last year it was him giving up the play calling, which was like whoa, that's kind of surprising. But then he talked about like these days in college football, like you kind of have to be as a head coach, you have to be the CEO and you have to do all like the recruiting, the portal, the NIL, all this stuff, like as the CEO of the program. And it just comes to be a lot when you're also calling plays. So Hinshaw's calling plays. You still have to do all those things. So like, can he just suddenly manage all of that better?
So that's what I want to get
I
into, because when
don't
Gus
know.
last year said that he was giving up play calling, he said that he realized it the week of the Cincinnati game, and he was pretty candid and talked about that he felt the team had suffered because he did not have the energy and the time to devote to fully game planning and fully calling an offense. And when you look at what being a head coach is today versus what it was even 5 years ago, I mean, there are so many things about it that aren't even actually being the coach. There's recruiting, which is now year round. There's roster management, managing your own roster, which is also not only year round, but now you have 85 scholarship players, and every single one of them is a free agent 365 days out of the year and can leave at any point. You need to manage the culture, you need to manage their moods, you need to have your finger on the heartbeat of your own roster. You also need to be scouting transfers just as much as you're scouting recruits. That's become just as important. You have to deal with all the portal, both guys leaving, guys coming in. You have to be fundraising not just for the athletics department as you had before, you also have to be fundraising for NIL. It's never been more important. Your fundraising is now directly tied to whether you can get a good player or not. There isn't room for doing all that and for also running an offense or defense. And it's why across the country, virtually every major college football head coach has given up calling their respective offense or defense over the last few years. It's happening everywhere. And like you just said, nothing has changed. All of those challenges are still there. It seems that the only thing that changed is that Gus has always been a play caller and really hated watching his team, which is understandable, watching his team lose game after game when he was not calling the offense. But this is, of all the changes of Ted Roof of everything, this is the one that is the biggest alarm bells to me, because Gus Malzahn told us a year ago that the program was having a problem because he was trying to do both. And
Yeah.
if he's doing both again, there will once again be problems. Word around the program at the time was that Malzahn was overwhelmed trying to do all of these things at once. And what has
I don't
changed?
blame him for that, honestly.
There's only
Like,
so many hours in a day. So he's going to have to do this. He's going to have to cut in other places. Is it recruiting? Is it fundraising? Where is it? Where are those hours and where is that time coming from?
yeah, I don't know. And that's the funny thing about all of this is it wasn't like the offense wasn't the problem last year. So
No,
it's
no
like
one thought
under
it
Hinshaw,
was.
it just I don't know. I don't understand it. And it really just screams I want control back
Yeah.
of my offense. I don't know. Wasn't there something along the lines of like KJ Jefferson factors into this too?
Yeah.
And
So the word on the street is that I always say the word on the street when I just mean social media and message boards, but the word on the
yeah,
street
it
is
sounds
that
funny. It sounds better when you say the word on the street.
very much the pitch for KJ was Gus saying, "Hey, remember when I called plays for Cam Newton, and remember how you're like him? Let's go do that again." So I get that. I don't know.
I
I don't know if I believe with a straight face that KJ wouldn't have come here if Gus Malzahn said that
That's the
it's
thing.
my offense, but someone else is going to actually
Right.
pick the play. I don't know if I buy that, but
That's why I'm skeptical of the whole thing. It's like it's not like he's coming in. He wouldn't be coming in. Oh, he has to come in. Like I don't want to come in and run Darren Hinshaw's offense. Like you're still
yeah,
running Gus Malzahn's offense. Is it make a huge difference to you of where you're going to play your final year of college football, whether or not Gus Malzahn is the one reading off the play sheet and saying, "All right, run this play." Like I
yeah.
just that seemed a little bit overblown to me, and I feels like a Gus like excuse for being like, this is what I want to do, and oh yeah, like I mean, I got the
Which,
quarterback in, and
listen, to just play devil's advocate, because if I haven't said it clearly, I don't agree with this, and I think this is a mistake for Gus to be taking back the offense, and I think there are going to be consequences. Now the issue is that I may not be able to be proven right on this because those consequences aren't necessarily going to be tangible. It might be a recruit that again didn't get talked to as much. It might be a player on the roster who maybe if Gus had a conversation, he no longer has time for. That player's not in the portal. It might be a booster who didn't get that phone
who
call and
knows?
maybe
Yeah,
isn't putting it. We're just not going to know it. But there's only so much time in a day. There are going to be consequences for this. But to play devil's advocate and look at it from Malzahn's perspective, you were a high school coach in Arkansas. That was where your career started. You went from high school coach in Arkansas to winning a national championship as an offensive coordinator and then coaching a major brand in the SEC. You went there by calling plays. So I think that for him, it was a very difficult thing last year to not only not be doing that, but to be watching your team struggle while you're not doing it. I understand the impulse to want to take those reins back. I think it's unfortunate that there's no one at UCF to check him and say, this is probably not the right decision. And we've talked about a
yeah,
lot in the past how one of the big benefits of UCF is there's no one in Malzahn's face telling him what to do and what not to do. I think that was his downfall at Auburn. But this is the one situation where you kind of wish Mahaja or someone had said, are you really sure? Remember what things were like midway through 2022 when you were trying to do this and do everything else and how difficult and nearly impossible that was. Are you sure you want to do this? So we'll see how it goes.
And I mean, there's always the shot that like there's always the chance that he could pass it back off again if he really can't handle it. But like at that point, then you're opening up. All right, I guess is he giving that to Tim Harris, who I don't believe has ever called plays before,
I
or
don't
is he
believe
giving
so.
it to
Yeah.
one of his co-OCs who
That's a good
called the
question. So
plays last year?
say that we're 4 or 5 games into the season, and just like 2022, Gus is overwhelmed, and I just don't see this happening because I think he's too much of a
No,
control
it
freak.
doesn't.
But say
Yeah.
he's like, we got it, the cutting will happen elsewhere. It will happen in recruiting or fundraising. And he says, I got it. I can't do this anymore. Who is calling plays? Probably just Hinshaw, right? Because he's the only one on the staff who has
Yeah,
experience
the
with it.
co-OC,
The
not the
co-OC
OC.
Hinshaw, not the OC. Yeah, I mean, they could give it to Tim Harris, and he could just be like, "We're going to give RJ 100 carries every single game."
And you know what? Fair,
Might work. Wouldn't be
fair.
opposed, but yeah, Gus is back as the play caller. All those annoying reverses that we
Remember how much
loved in
everyone loved him
2022 and
calling
2021, they're
plays?
back. Yeah. Which
What's
again, for
funny?
the record, I was fine with his play calling. I was like the person who said I didn't think it's as bad as everyone else did. And honestly, it wasn't that different under Hinshaw. They threw the ball downfield a little more than they did in 2021 and
This is
2022.
this is what's hilarious for narratives is that everyone hated Gus's play calling in 2022. He gives it up in 2023, and even while Henshaw's calling plays, everyone's like, Gus is still calling the plays. Like it's just, this is the same thing.
That's right.
And then he does take play calling back, which we find out now. And it's like, yeah, Gus, this is just Gus calling plays still. And toward the back half of the year, yeah, it was. Now he's taking back play calling again. Everyone's just like, nothing's changed. Like we still hate your play calling. So we'll see how quickly or how fast we get into the season, and people are just
to all the
know,
fans who are mad and like that we would question any decision UCF makes, because obviously if a UCF coach makes it, that means it's the right choice. I love when people say stuff like that. You should trust the coaches. Like college football coaches aren't fired every single year in mass. Like they screw up all the time, guys, and it's often predictable. But anyway,
and it's often ego related.
But for all of you who are so excited Gus is going to be calling plays again next year, just keep in mind he called them for the second half of the season, and the most recent time you've seen Gus Malzahn call plays was in the Gasparilla Bowl against Georgia Tech when they did not score a point in the second half. So there you go. Enjoy. But yeah, I think I've said all I have to say.
I think so. No, I think we covered that. The other one that I skipped over from the outline was back on the defensive side of the ball. They hired Trovon Reed as the cornerbacks coach. Secondary coach David Gibbs, who was the co-DC with Addison Williams, I guess. Right? Yeah, they were co-DC.
He was a co-DC.
And he was secondaries coach. He's gone. I think he's at Illinois now.
He is.
And I don't know. I don't have. I'll let you. I'll take the lead on this one because I don't know if I have a ton of thoughts on this, and I'm not like overly familiar with Reed, but it seems like a lot of people are excited about it.
I think this was a very, very, very important pickup. I think that this might be the pickup of all the things we've talked about on here. So he was the director of football and recruiting relations at Auburn. Big deal that UCF pulled him away, and you saw the impact immediately when Auburn's top recruit, Kendarius Reddick, DB in the 2025 class and the number 64 player in the country, blowing out of the water. Like John Walker's like nothing compared to how highly rated this guy is. Flipped from Auburn to UCF. The understanding is that was largely due to Reed's impact. So he is a hell of a recruiter and he has a lot of ties. I think UCF is going to really be able to up their recruiting because of him. That he's the home run of all these coaching hire changes.
I needed my college football newsletter to make that connection for me because I didn't think about that until you just said that.
Oh, the whole Reddick thing?
That they flipped Reddick from Auburn because Reed came from Auburn.
Yeah, you hire Reed and then Auburn.
I would have had things to say if I had thought about that, made that connection before. I would have had things to say to start this part of the podcast.
Yeah, they lose their top recruit of their class to UCF.
Yeah.
Which a little bit just quickly on that, Kendarius Reddick, like I said, number 64 player in the country. I still can't believe that he's committed to UCF. It's blowing my mind. It just didn't feel like it was that big of a deal. Like I remember when John Walker committed to UCF, we did an emergency podcast. When Jalen Hayward committed, we had a podcast schedule, but it was like, it just felt like these huge deals on social media for the fan base. This one happened and people were like, oh, awesome. This is a huge deal. This is way bigger of a deal than John Walker or Jalen Hayward were.
I think the days of us having emergency podcasts for recruiting wins are gone because I think people are just going to expect this to be the norm, which like, it's crazy that that's where UCF's already gotten in 1 year in the Big 12. It's like, not like they're going to do this all the time, but still like they're recruiting at such a level to where it did feel like that, where it was like, wow, that's a huge deal. Like he's a top 100 player, Auburn's top recruit. But then it was like, oh, that's going to be awesome. I think part of it too is like, it's so early in the 2025 cycle that people are like, let's not like get locked in on this yet. But I think it was like Yeah, that was really cool. And
I'm
then it
ready
was
to
like,
get
all right,
locked
what
in on
else?
UCF landing a commitment from the number 7 safety in the country. I'm ready for that. Like I'm gonna and what you said is
As
spot
long as
on.
he stays.
Because we're how many months are we out from signing day? 10? I guess we're about 10 months
Yeah,
because it's early December. And yeah,
yeah,
that's a long ways away. And it's true that John Walker and Jalen Hayward both committed closer to their respective signing days. They were both over the summer, so I do understand that. And but I'll say the same thing I said when John Walker committed, and a lot of people were saying, well, he might decommit, so it doesn't matter. Having a guy like this in your class who's so highly rated, he's a cornerstone that you can build a class around. He's a guy that a lot of recruits notice, whoa, he committed to UCF. That's interesting. Now I'm talking to UCF. Now I'm interested. What's going on down there? It seems like it's becoming a thing. And not to mention, which I don't know why that UCF is just continuously just snatching all the top players out of the state of Georgia. It's ridiculous that I can even say that as a sentence, but he's another example. So
state
even
of
if
Orlando.
state of Atlanta, even if Reddick does eventually decommit, if he flips back to Auburn or goes somewhere else, the impact that he has now and the recruits who are now listening to UCF or who might join this class because of the momentum UCF is building, you're not going to lose all of them. So it's good no matter what. And if you
Yeah,
do manage to hold on to him, congratulations. You just landed a DB who you can just throw out there as a starter next year. Go for it. Like you said, I think what you said is right. It's happening so much now, which is crazy. Landing 4 stars is not an unusual thing for UCF anymore, which is hilarious because it's actually still an unusual thing for a lot of the Big 12. They're just out recruiting the
yeah,
hell out of. And so I said a couple podcasts ago, if UCF does this every year, if this class is like last year's class and they're signing 7 or 8, 9 4 stars and they do that year after year, it's going to get to a point where there are a lot of Big 12 teams who legitimately just do not have the same level of talent as UCF. That's nothing to say a bad coach can always screw that up and still
yeah.
lose games, but it's nice to have more talent than most of the teams you're playing.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, no, I think all I can tell about Reed so far is that there's a lot of buzz. Like players
Yeah.
seemed to be really excited when he got when it was announced that he was hired, and a lot of people just really seemed all in on his addition to the staff. So yeah, I mean Gibbs, I think Gibbs was good for what he was, somebody who um had experience and was there to help along a young play caller, I think, a young defensive coordinator. I think he did a decent job with the secondaries too. I don't think there's anything like he
No.
did where I'm like, oh, good, glad Gibbs is gone. But it's just like, yeah, I mean, I think this makes sense in the grand scheme of things. And, I don't know that there's anything when I look at like the whole picture of all of this, it's like a lot of it I feel good about. Some of it I'm very, very cautious about. Well, I
Yep.
think the biggest thing that I'm cautious about, two big things, and they're probably the two biggest things out of these changes is Roof being the defensive coordinator and Gus calling plays back or
Yep.
taking play calling back. The fact that those are the two things that I'm concerned about is bad because those are the two biggest of
Pretty
these
sizable.
changes. The other ones are great, and I think that's a really good thing. But if either of those things prove, if my worries about those proves to be valid, we're looking at problems next season. And that's kind of where we can talk about this whole picture of UCF going all in, making all these changes. Because what did Gus say about like winning 6 games? Like, did he say unacceptable
He
or a
said he
failure or
said
something like
six and
that?
seven was an unacceptable season for them. Which the scariest part to me is, it's funny how something happens, it becomes history, and it's the only way you remember it. But going into the bowl game against Georgia Tech, the fan base was in a very good mood. UCF had just closed out on a 3-1 stretch. They just signed off on the best class in program history. Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson, and RJ Harvey, or Kobe Hudson not at that point. Javon Baker and
Yeah.
RJ Harvey both announced they were coming back. Going into that game, it was celebration mode for UCF fans. Then they lost Georgia Tech. Fans went nuts. Do all these changes still happen if they won that bowl? And if the answer is no, alarm bells for me, because making a decision over a meaningless bowl game is nuts. I don't
I
know.
wonder.
But
Yeah.
I do wonder a little bit.
Well, I wonder about that when he says like it's a failure. Like if they win that game and they finish 7-6, is that a complete failure?
I don't know
Compared to
what.
what? Like, was he thinking they were going to win 9 or 10 games? And if that's the case, as I think you wrote about in your column,
Yep.
like that's concerning. If he looked at last year's roster and said, "Yeah, this is a team that's good enough and deep enough to compete in at the top level of the Big 12, like in our first year," that's concerning.
That was
But
probably the darkest point I made in that column that I know some people had an
yeah,
issue with, was just simply everyone nationally figured that UCF was probably something like a 6-6 or 7-5 team, maybe 8-4 if a couple balls bounce your way. If Gus Malzahn seriously saw that team they had, with that linebacker room they had, with a quarterback who he knows is going to get hurt, and thought we can go win the conference, then that suggests dramatic issues. And I don't know if that's the case, but when you're supposed to go 6-6 or 7-5, and you go 6-6 and 7-5, and then you're firing coaches and calling the season unacceptable in press conference, it implies that you were not familiar with your own roster at that point.
even, and I'm bringing up Baylor again. even if they win that game, like that game, blowing that lead and losing that game and that turning into something in the loss column versus win column, if that's different, does all this happen? Like, do
Yeah.
you like you blowing that lead, like maybe a once in I don't know how many chances lead that you've blown? If is that worth making all of these changes? Like, are you saying like this is a failure of a season? Like, if you flip that result, they win that game, say they win the bowl game, and that's 8 wins. Like, are you still because they weren't far away from that? They weren't far away from those. Like,
I
they
don't
were,
think they
and
make
they
these changes.
missed
I don't
they
think they
missed an
do.
extra point to tie the game late against Texas Tech. They turned the ball over in the like near the red zone like 4 times against West Virginia. Like there was things last year in those games where you're like UCF's competitive in these games. A few things different, they win them.
Now, to play devil's advocate a little bit there, they also needed a 53-yard field goal to beat a Boise State team that wasn't awesome.
Yeah,
They also barely got past a Cincinnati team that was terrible. Like and that's why I was
when Gus took play calling
when
back.
Gus took play calling back, and that was also when people were saying they were so close. Look at all these close games. I'm like, yeah, but they won some close games too. I just don't think they were
Yeah,
super good. But the thing you have to understand about Gus Malzahn is he's been head coach for a long time, and before the season, he had never in his entire coaching career lost more than 3 games in a row. And he had never in his entire coaching career finished with a losing record. So I think that's what made it unacceptable. I think the losing streak made it unacceptable. I think the losing record did. But again, it's a game of inches. And if you are actually making changes that you would not have made before because of a bowl game that no one cares about, that does not mean anything, that is not indicative of a season in any way, shape, or form, we're moving into an era where bowl games are largely exhibitions. To make a change based on what happened in that game, largely with players who won't be back here next year anyway, that would be stunning to me. So I hope that's not what happened. And I'm not even saying I do think it is, but I just remember how the mood was during that week. And if they won that bowl game, the fan base would have gone into the offseason totally satisfied. They would have had this great transfer class like they had anyway, and people would have been very happy. And then they would have started axing coaches, and people would have been mortified. So that's where I get a little questioning.
that's the one side of it, and the other side of this is you make all these changes. You have RJ coming back, you have Kobe coming back, you get KJ Jefferson, and you have this team now where you're setting up to be okay. We're not dipping down from the 6 wins we had last year. We're gonna improve upon that and be in the top level of the Big 12. What if it doesn't work? What is next season? What does next offseason look like? Like, is this your my chips are all in, and if it doesn't work out, like then what? Because then you're not gonna have. Are you gonna change all the coaches again? Are you gonna completely flip things around again? Like I don't know what this is setting up for in the future if all of these things don't work out. And I guess there's something to be said that, like, yeah, you've got to make the changes in the moment that you think are best for this next season. But when you're setting up this next season to be what he's setting it up for, what if they do win 7 games? Like, is that going to be enough of an improvement for him to be like, this was like, we're building in the right direction? Or is it going to be like, we were supposed to win 10 games this year? And then what?
And that's the scariest part to me, because we're looking at a situation where UCF is next year going to be in a 16-team league that has as many as 6 teams that are in the mix to possibly be in the top 25 to start the season, has as many as 8 teams that believe that they have the roster to win the Big 12 next year. It's going to be the most even league in the history of Power 5 or Power 4 football. It legitimately is. And UCF and their changes and Gus Malzahn's words in press conferences has now set up a situation where if UCF is not in the conference title game, it is going to be considered a disappointment. They go 8-4. It's considered a disappointment. And to raise the bar that high, that fast is exciting. It's cool that we can spend this offseason talking about, hey, can they win the Big 12 versus, gosh, I hope they go to a bowl for the second year in a row. That's cool. It's also, you were on a path and you've taken yourself off of that path in hopes of being better faster. And I think that was maybe the right move, but there's no way around the fact that it is absolutely a risk. And if they're not good next year, or if they can be good next year, if they're not great next year, it blows up in his face. Recruiting can fall apart. The fan base will be done with Malzahn. There's a lot of implications if next season doesn't go well.
And what is I think even scarier about that is sentiment can completely blow up if things don't go as well as he is planning for them to go. Like everybody's going to say, get him out of here, get him out of here. UCF's still not going to have the money to get him out. So is he doing this because he knows like they're not firing me? Like they don't have the money to fire me. So I mean, I'm not saying he's doing that because of that, but like
I don't
he
think
doesn't
he
really
is.
have to. He doesn't really have to worry about that. Like if these moves don't work out.
But that's what makes it so interesting, because he's making moves like he does. Like we know he doesn't have to worry about that, but these are the moves of a coach who believes that their time is running out. And that's why I'm so interested, because he has as long here as he wants. They can't fire him. Maybe he's decided on his own. Maybe if they're bad next year, he just walks away. I feel like that sounds crazy, but I don't know if I'd be super surprised if, say, they go 7-5 next year. Everyone's mad if he just says, I'm older, I have a lot of money.
Arkansas opens back up.
Arkansas opens back up. I'm ready to be with my family and just walks away. That wouldn't shock me if that happened. So I don't know.
That's where I think it's more than well, they're not going to fire me. It is like he probably realized he's not coaching forever.
Right.
He probably was realizing that he's not coaching forever, and it's one of those things where it's like we need to get good fast, and we need to get to that level. And it's weird. No one knows except for him and maybe people close to him. But like, say all this stuff does work out. Say they win the Big 12. Does he walk away?
I don't think he does.
I'm ending on this note because like, what is his end goal?
I think genuinely, not joking, I think his end goal is he wants to win a national championship at UCF. I don't believe that's possible. That's gonna be a controversial comment, but let's be real, guys. It's not right now. It's not. I agree. I mean, especially in the 12-team playoff era, you can't tell me with a straight face that UCF at this point in time, or really at any point in the next couple of years, is going to have the roster that would be capable of winning 4 straight games or 3 straight games against top 5 or top 10 teams. I don't believe that's possible. Yeah. But that's his goal. I don't know. But I think if you're Malzahn, right, and next year, say that it's the dream, right? UCF goes 10-2. They win the Big 12. They get a bye in the first round of the playoff, which they will if they win the Big 12. And say they win, I don't know, they win the Fiesta Bowl and they go to the semifinals and they lose in the semifinals. Great year. Like, spectacular, anything we could have ever dreamed of. I feel like he's sitting there like, man, we were 2 wins away for a national championship. I need to run it back. And we've got these recruits coming in. Like, I don't know. I just feel like it's addicting that for these coaches. They're very similar personalities, all of them. And I feel like he would just be determined to keep going at that point.
And I wonder what his long-term or even short-term plan is, because I agree with that. But then if they say they get to the semifinal and lose, which is a wild circumstance to throw out there, but even say that happens, and he says, all right, I want to run it back. You're looking at the roster next year, and yes, you have all these exciting recruits coming up, but they're still going to be very, very young, and you're still going to have to develop them. And I don't think they're going to be able to say, let's just run it back next year, unless you're building the team through the portal and saying, like, let's just do this 1 year at a time, which I don't think is the way to build the program. Maybe they can,
but because at that point, the 2022 class, which showed a lot, or the 2023 class, excuse me, that showed a lot of promise, is going to be older. The 2024 class we just signed is going to be ready to commit. They'll have the freaking Reddick they just signed in 2025. Just throw them out there. Like, why not? And then on top of that, they will add transfers. They'll have EJ Colson, Riley Trujillo, and Dylan Rist to pick from at quarterback. He can easily convince himself that they can just. Well,
that's what I'm saying. But you're picking from one of those quarterbacks who hasn't had meaningful snaps at all. So that's a big if. That's a big question mark. You can't go in. Like, I don't think you can just go into, say, 2025 and say, the rest of our team is solid, and we can make it back to the Big 12 title game with a quarterback who will be getting his first meaningful snaps. Like, that's a lot.
This might be a hot take, but I feel as good about the quarterback room as I have in long time, because I think that they're finally out of the woods where they had like veteran guy who's playing now and one young guy who you hope pans out, which they got stuck in for a while. Now you have really good veteran player who will be successful, and then you have 3 young guys who all have potential. Like, they're a good spot. They're at a good spot.
No, I feel good about it long term, but I don't know that any of those guys will step in 2025 and say, yeah, we're winning 10 games. We're getting back to it. So, like, I just wonder. I wonder if he goes into, I don't know. I mean,
Avery Johnson's stepping in for Kansas State this year. He only played a few games last year. They think they can win the Big 12 with him. He's like a 5-star, but still.
But Kansas State's a different circumstance. Just the way that their team is built, they don't need their quarterback to put up 50 points a game.
He actually seems like such a contradiction from the way they run their offense, because they're just like a bunch of big boys who are just going to hammer you, and it's going to be crazy. And then they also have this very sneaky, elusive, shifty quarterback. It's going to be it's going to be really
he's so much fun, though.
I'm very glad UCF does not play Kansas State this year, for the record, because I think they're going to be very good.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is, you wonder in the context of all of these moves, what Gus is thinking this year and in future years, in the long term. Like, I'm very, very curious. And even I was already curious about like how long he wants to keep coaching before all this happened. And now it's like he's going all in this year. And I wonder like how many years he thinks he has left, or how many years he wants to plan on having left to coach. And before he says, all right, like I'm going to go spend time with my family. Or the whole other weird like situation where it's, how much longer does he have at UCF? Maybe he's thinking like, all right, I'm giving myself some time here, and I do want to get back up to a top, like a SEC job. Maybe he does want to go back. I think it'd be crazy, but
I
I
think
wouldn't
with
be
each
overly
passing year that
surprised.
gets less likely. Now what'll make it more likely is the SEC and the Big Ten are becoming their own thing pretty quickly here.
Yeah.
And it's not crazy to think that 2 or 3 years from now, UCF's not considered at the same tier as those teams. I think there's a good chunk of college football fans and media who don't consider them at that tier right now. I
Yeah.
honestly think how the playoff shakes out the next couple of years is really going to impact that. If the Big 12 and ACC championships are just getting clocked in the first round each year, and it's a bunch of Big 10 and SEC teams in the quarter and semifinals, that's going to accelerate. If you see a Big 12 or an ACC team advance or win a title or something like that, then maybe that narrative slows. But it might be a point where Gus isn't saying I have a Power 4 job in 2 years. He's saying I'm outside the Power 2 and I got to get in. But also, he's getting older. I don't know how many jobs are interested in him, even if UCF does do really well. I've heard some stuff that's cooled me on Arkansas as a threat a little bit because I think that there are some questions for Gus Malzahn just about what that would mean for him and his legacy if he takes over his home state program at this stage in his career.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we don't know. And the real answer is Gus Malzahn probably doesn't know either. It's just
Yeah.
we're just gonna have to see what happens.
You do wonder, and this is the last thing I'll say about this. We don't need to go too much longer on it, but the and like as you say, more and more time passes as the years go on, it feels less likely. Like because he is getting older, and then I feel like the pool of teams that are going to go after an older coach whose like best work was in the early 2010s, like that pool of teams that will want to hire him will shrink.
Yeah.
I just believe that's the case because they'll want the younger coaches or the rising coaches, not a guy who people were saying when he came to UCF, was like, oh, that's his retirement job, which like he's very clearly like he's so all in, like he's not acting like a guy who's just cool with just I'm just here to collect a paycheck and do whatever
Right.
and retire.
No
Like
Big Ten team is going to hire him because he's an old coach who's never recruited or coached outside the South.
yeah,
And someone like all the top tier SEC jobs are always they're gonna pick the best coach available. And I have a hard time seeing anything Gus can do at UCF where he'd ever be considered the best coach available in a cycle. So you're down to mid tier and low tier SEC teams, and then at that point just becomes what does he value? Does he
yeah,
think he can secure a better legacy for himself at South Carolina than he does at UCF? Like that's the conversation we'd be having.
yeah. And I hope we're sitting here in November and December and saying, wow, he pushed all the right buttons with these coaching changes and it all worked out. Like, I hope that's the case.
Do you ever think about how likely it is that UCF fans, once Gus is no longer the coach, are going to hate him? Because
I don't really.
there's a really
A
high
lot of people hate him
chance.
already.
Well, but I'm just saying, because it's just kind of the thing about, like, I was thinking about that, like, right, like Washington just went to the national championship game, which no one saw coming, and their fans all hate Kalen DeBoer because he left and took some players. And it's like, if you're Gus at UCF, right, you take another job after they have a good year, so they hate you, or you suck and get fired, so they hate you. It's like the only way this ends well is if he actually retires at UCF's head coach after having at least one very good season. That's a
Yeah.
slippery. I mean, that's a tough line to toe. So
Even that's the thing is like I don't know. I don't know what the threshold is, but the way they were building, and I know people were annoyed with last year and the way they did it. I've said it a million times. The way they got to 6-6 was insane. Like I
Yep.
did not enjoy most of last season.
6 weeks of not winning a
They
game is
win.
tough.
Yeah, they win 6 games in year one in the Big 12. Say he was thinking, all right, maybe this is gonna be my last year, and that he won 8 games in 2024. He's building towards something, and if he retired at that point, there would be people that were like, "Oh, like what a bust." But I think there would also be like the overwhelming the way people. I don't want to tell people how they should feel, but the way you should feel about what if the way you should have felt about that if that was the case was like he came in and did what he had to do. Like he got recruiting to a new level, transitioned UCF into the Big 12, started building something to where whoever's taking the program up over now, they're in a good spot. Like that, I think would leave his legacy at UCF feeling like, yeah, like we didn't win a ton of games, but he built and there's enough there to appreciate to where now it's like you get into worse territory. The longer you stay and the longer you go without winning 9-10 games, it's going to be people are going to look back on his time and be like, what a missed opportunity because we had all these good players, but we never put it all together.
I'm going to push back on that for a couple of reasons. And
Okay.
I know I'm just prolonging a conversation at this point. We're running a little long here. But the first reason I'm going to push back on it is that I think too much of his legacy is still colored by what happened in the AAC. And that was a 2021 season, which was a good coaching job. But at the end of the day, they came a shockingly mismanaged Navy loss away from having a 10-win season. And then you go into 2022 where they could have hosted game day and didn't. They had 2 opportunities to go to the Cotton Bowl, to go play a New Year's Six Bowl. They could have just beaten Navy at home and they could have beaten Tulane in the conference title game, and they couldn't do it. And it's just turned into every year of Gus is a year of what if. So I think if he walked away after 8-4 next year, it would just be Gus Malzahn, the guy who we always thought we were going to have a good season with, but never did. The other reason I'm going to push back, and this is the bigger reason, is there's no such thing as building anymore. When your coach leaves, your program's done. Everyone leaves, the current roster evaporates, the recruits don't come in, you start over from scratch. We've seen that. Alabama just had to do that. And Nick Saban even tried to sort of game the system a little bit where he waited to retire until well after signing day and they got the recruits in, and it helped, but they still lost some of them. They still lost a lot of guys to the portal, and they've had a really hard time bringing new guys in. Washington's roster evaporated. Arizona's roster evaporated. It's there's no building anymore. It's not like the old days where you build a foundation, the next guy carries it. It's like you win when you're the coach or you don't, and that's it.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I don't know. That's an entirely different conversation that I don't know how I feel about that.
It's just the way I don't like it, but it's the way it is.
No, I guess I'm being an old head and be like, the game is going in the wrong direction. Because it's just like it gets to a point where it's like, what are we doing?
The portal stuff is out of control, but not to like get super into NCAA stuff, but the issue is because of NIL, transfer portal stuff is out of control. And that's because now anytime the NCAA tries to restrict player movement, like when they said you can only transfer for free once, it's antitrust because you're saying you're pushing you're clamping down on my ability to earn a wage. So they can't do it. So unless the players become officially employees, and then there will be a collective bargaining agreement, and then players are signed to contracts. Like honestly, 3 years from now, we're going to say on this podcast, like big news, UCF just signed 4-star whoever to a 2-year, $600,000 deal. That we're going to be talking like that in a couple years. And it will be better than
NFL.
It'll be better then because it'll be better than every single offseason. We're like, God, I wonder which of these guys who can just leave whenever they want are going to leave whenever they want. So
yeah,
it's going to be weird though.
It's already weird
conversation.
It's already weird where we've gotten in just the last couple of years with it. And it all took off so fast. And now I think there's some, I don't even know if you can call it course correction, but it's just like there's things that are going to have to happen where it's going to look even weirder in a couple of years. So
think of how college football was a completely different sport. What, 4 years ago? 3 years ago? Think of how different things were just for like 2019. It looks nothing like how college football looks today.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. All right, we can leave it there. We'll leave it there because we could talk all night about the changes in college football and how much has changed and what will still change. But we're here for that every other week of the year. So
and we have a long off season ahead of us. So.
Yeah, we will have those conversations. So let's get into the football news real quick. Not a ton to get through.
Can I say something really quickly?
Yeah.
Anthony Kinsey took over as strength coach after Chris Dawson's contract was not renewed. We don't have much to say on strength coach anyway, because honestly, that's just one of those.
We were going to talk about that. Yeah, we were going to talk about that, but it was like, I don't know. I don't know anything.
It's fine. We don't know.
So yeah.
Cool. All right.
Cool. All right. Football news. Could have just thrown that in the football news at this point. This happened like 2 weeks ago too. John Rice Plumlee was named the Shrine Bowls All-West practice team, or he was named to the Shrine Bowls All-West practice team as the best practice quarterback of the week over there. I think it was in Frisco, Texas. I didn't have this on the football news, but Javon Baker had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. I think he tweaked something on the second day, so I don't think he practiced on the third day. Or maybe he tweaked something on the third day. I don't remember what it was, but I did end up talking to him last Wednesday, I believe it was, and it's pretty cool to talk to him. Nice little conversation. There was a lot of people surrounding him, wanting to get a word in with him. So some of the things I wanted to ask him, didn't get to ask him, and that's a shame. But
he said his favorite combo is night mode, so take that, uniform haters.
Yeah, and it was nice, and I'm really excited. I'm looking at more and more mock drafts just with my other job and trying to, I'm looking at mock drafts for different reasons, but I will always look and see where he is, and seeing him like the third or fourth round. And one of the ones I saw recently was him going to Jacksonville, which I'm sure a lot of UCF fans would like. So we'll see come April where he goes, but I think he's just going to continue rising. I think he had a really good week, and we'll see if he gets a combine invite, but I think there's something there with him and his NFL future. We talked about Kendarius Reddick already flipping from Auburn to UCF. And the transfer class enrolling on Wednesday. The only other thing was that UCF added a 3-star late here in the cycle on Wednesday. Manatee defensive tackle Tyreek Robinson. I think he's a preferred walk-on.
He is probably
preferred walk-on. But hey, I'm not gonna turn down more defensive linemen and players from Manatee because
something very weird is going on there. Because A, he had interest from a lot of good schools, and B, he's a preferred walk-on who has a higher composite rating than like 5 guys in this class who signed. So I don't there's something there. I don't know
handshake agreement behind the scenes of when we can, you'll get a scholarship. Like
what's funny is there was when NIL first took off, there was a major concern about that like teams were going to get around the scholarship limits by just handing NIL money to pay for tuition for players who weren't within the scholarship limit, and it literally has not happened anywhere.
Yeah.
I am surprised that they got a player of that caliber as a preferred walk on. I suspect he will not be a preferred walk on forever.
Yeah. All right, let's get into game of the week. I referenced it at the top of the show, but softball's starting. Baseball's next week. Softball starts tomorrow on Thursday, maybe today as
So
you're listening to
excited.
this.
So excited.
Very exciting. They start off as they usually do with these kind of invitational tournaments. This one's at UCF. I won't give you the whole schedule, but they start with a game on Thursday afternoon. But the ones I have here for game of the week are against UConn Thursday at 7, and they'll play them again Saturday at 5:30 as part of this weekend. UConn's as of D1 softball put out their tournament projections for the preseason. UConn was the included in there as the Big East, as the Big East representative. UCF was in there as an at-large from the Big 12. So yeah, that's a potential early season big matchup, which I wouldn't, looking at on paper, I'm like, I wouldn't think UConn was that good in softball, but apparently they're
Who would have thought?
tournament. They have tournament potential, but really cool friend of the program, Eric Lopez, doing bracketology for D1 softball is just awesome.
That's awesome.
So that'll be really cool to follow along all season. And I'm just looking forward to watching UCF softball again. Like that's one of the more fun sports at UCF to follow. One, because they're really good, but also softball is usually just a quick game and just a fun sport to watch. So
it's a growing sport too, getting very popular, and UCF's in a very good league.
Yeah. So we'll be keeping up with that all year long, likely through game of the week segments, and we'll see. We'll see when we get into the offseason where there's nothing to talk about football-wise. I think we'll do a softball podcast if there's a market for it. But
we did a softball podcast last year with Eric Lopez, and it really didn't do terrible. So I think that we could attempt to do that. But anyway.
Yeah. Tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week. Tweet of the week this week, we're going to go back to something I already talked about because I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. But tweet of the week this week goes to Joseph Styles at It's Ya Boy Styles, who was kind enough to reply to me on Twitter when I said I was disappointed to see Ernie Sims let go. He replied, there's going to be a curse word here, so prepare yourself. We had one of the worst run defenses in the country. We bitched and moaned all year about how bad the defense and linebacker play was. Now changes are being made and you don't get it. So all I have to say is everything again as I said earlier. I could just repeat the Carpenter analogy because I think it was quite eloquent. But again, I'm looking for some more fan literacy. I'm looking for some of you, not all of you, because most of you I like a lot. I'm looking for some of you to use an amazing thing called critical thinking and actually understand how any of this works. So thanks for listening.
Nah, Christian, Ernie Sims, he was the reason why the run defense was bad. It was him and him only. Now they're going to be top 5 in run defense now.
I can't deal with it, man. It's some people tweet stuff and I'm just like, did you think about this for one single second before you came to that take? And I know the answer is no, but still.
I know a lot of times in like conversations, people just like tell you like log off. Like I log off sometimes just because I see other people's tweets and I'm like, I can't deal with it. Like,
I see a nonsensical tweet and I think I have to reply to this. And I don't know. I hate that that's how my brain works, but it is.
Instead of telling others to log off, I'm just going to step away because I don't want to deal with this. But yeah, appreciated the conversation today. I thought that was a pretty good podcast that we had with I know we waited for a while because the coaching changes are now a couple weeks old, but we wanted to talk about the schedule first and then get into these changes. But
next week Chick-fil-A meal is going to be on the wait. Next week is steak dinner, I think, because is
that what it is?
Yeah, the 3 years are steak. Yeah. So next week, Bailey and I are putting a steak dinner on the line because it is time for our annual high school recruiting draft.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to even see. Like, I don't know. This is coming up. Will be the last year of our first one, right?
Yep, the 2024 is gonna. I can't believe it's already time for our first bet to come true.
Bizarre.
We'll get that ready and we'll talk about who we took in that class and who to watch.
I think trying to remember. I think I'm doing awful.
Quite a few of the players we selected have transferred out, so that's gonna make it interesting.
But on both sides. But I think mine have been especially bad. But yeah, we'll see. We'll talk recruits next week. From the 2024 class. But until then, you can find us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at @ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We will talk to you next week.
Bye, everybody.